So I think for a lot of Christians, the beloved 1998 film, The Prince of Egypt, may forever reign supreme in their hearts. But 2025 has actually been a really landmark year for animated Bible adaptations. The movies King of Kings and Light of the World were both very well received, and I personally enjoyed both those films. And even like the mega hit show The Chosen dipped its toes into the genre with The Chosen Adventures. The question now is, can the animated musical David close out the year on a high note? Well, I have seen it, so let's talk about it. Well, to answer my own question, it does, in fact, end the year on a high note, because this movie is really great. I think with a blend of just gorgeous animation, compelling and really thematically rich storytelling, and just good old-fashioned cinematic fun, I think David is the best animated Bible adaptation in years. Now, the film may not boast the same impressive roster of A-list voice talent, such as the very stacked King of Kings did, but it does feature a popular musical artist Phil Wickham in the role of David, as it traces David's journey from humble shepherd boy to revered king. And I think it's just a perfect kind of PG-rated alternative for audiences that may be too young to watch the Wonder Project's more gritty live-action House of David show. And maybe we can start with the visuals, because I think notably, after decades of faith-based movies lagging just woefully behind Hollywood quality, faith-based animation is now not only on par with the mainstream industry, it is quickly leading the charge. In my review for King of Kings, I called it a visual masterpiece, and I was also very enthusiastic about the throwback 2D animation style of Light of the World. And despite a far more detailed and textured aesthetic style than those two films, David is no less impressive. And the film really excels at a kind of visually communicating just scope, such as when the Israelites stand against the sprawling armies of the Philistines, or when David stares down Goliath. I think kind of in both the epic spectacle and the quieter moments, David is just a really beautiful film. As with many Bible adaptations, a necessary reverence for the source material at times prevents biblical narratives from always being adapted in ways best suited for cinema. But I actually think David does better than most at fashioning the sprawling source material into a cohesive and focused narrative. The film uses a lot of clever visual cues and music to reinforce the unifying themes in David's journey, focusing on specific aspects of his internal struggles and his faith, rather than merely stringing together the chronological highlights of the biblical narrative. As an adaptation, David does not stray too far from the biblical source material. I appreciated the decision to tell David's story beyond just the famous narrative of Goliath, which occurs around the midpoint of this runtime. Yes, there is an understandable condensing of the historical events and some notable alterations, especially in the film's climactic events. But I think for the most part, the film does remain true to scripture. As maybe a bit of a side note, I suspect most parents will not object to this film kind of softening the rougher edges of David's notoriously complicated story, but it does raise some questions for me. Much like the approach taken by the House of David show, there is a kind of odd tension between wanting to portray David as a man after God's own heart, which is a verse that appears as an opening title card of this movie, and yet then making amendments to his character and the biblical events to polish the rougher edges. For example, despite arguably being the greatest warrior in the entire Bible, David is shown in this movie as being mostly a peacemaker and even a borderline pacifist, which is a change most evident in some of the third act's diversions from scripture. Again, it's not overly concerning to me, the same way that I think making Noah and the flood about cute animals and not God's wrathful judgment on the world can be appropriate. But I do think it is at least worth considering how the Bible is being adapted, not only that it is being adapted. And as you may know from the movie's trailers, David is in fact a musical, which is obviously fitting for a tale about Scripture's most prolific songwriter. As a result, it arguably comes the closest a Bible adaptation has ever come to feeling like a classic Disney movie, although without some of maybe the problematic elements and messages. The songs themselves are all, I think, enjoyable. None really stand out as earworm hits, but I think neither are any of them obnoxious. And I do appreciate that the songs are cleverly integrated into the narrative and the themes in ways that make them feel like a crucial part of the storytelling, rather than ever feeling just intrusive diversions. And the song Tapestry is a prime example of this, using like the music to further the story and kind of establish central like visual metaphors and musical cues that do continue to like pay off throughout the rest of the film. I should also note that like, as a parent of two 10-year-old twin boys, I also appreciated a slightly more like masculine story than many other animated Bible adaptations. Now, because this is like by no means a movie just for boys, but I know my own two boys were just enthralled by the armies and the battles, and they did find like the Amalekites to be genuinely frightening foes. That being said, fear not, parents. This is still very much like a PG film. So while we do get to see David, hit Goliath in the head with a stone, which is probably this film's like standout moment, we don't get to see him like decapitate the giant with his own sword. As far as content to consider, things going on the surface of this, really nothing here. As far as language, the only thing I caught was there is one use of the word heck. For violence, like I said, there are some battle scenes, but there's no like blood or death shown. And you do see Goliath hit in the forehead with the stone, which is quite epic. But again, there's no blood shown in that event. And for sexuality, as would be expected and hoped, nothing in this film. As far as themes, worldview, things going on beneath the surface, like I said earlier, at times David does feel almost like an old school Disney movie. It's like a coming of age story about a very peppy young hero who kind of moves through the tale with a song in his heart. But really, I think beneath the surface, the film is almost like the thematic antithesis to those early Disney fairy tales. David is not a story about like following your heart, but about finding your identity and purpose as part of God's larger story. It's a story about like being a part of a larger community and like the family of God, rather than about like individualism and just like the self-gratification of like pursuing your own destiny. In fact, in some ways, I actually think this story does a better job at kind of establishing that redemptive theme than the live-action counterpart like the House of David has done, which at times has fallen more into the typical like chosen one archetype. And the central theme of this is most clearly established, as I mentioned earlier, through the song called Tapestry, as David's mother kind of uses her in-progress tapestry as a metaphor to teach David just about faith, where like from the one side we may not fully understand like the big picture, but we are but one thread among many, and the various like colors of our life all like have a purpose that contribute to like the unified picture that the creator is fashioning together. And the use of like the tapestry metaphor is obviously like a clever callback to Psalm 139 when David writes, you knit me together in my mother's womb. But it's also just a really beautiful and I think easily accessible way to communicate the message to young viewers that being a hero is not just about becoming like a mighty king. It's about being faithful to join in like the bigger story that God is telling all around us. In the end, I think this is a great movie and one that like my whole family enjoyed. I think faith-based storytelling is thriving these days in Hollywood, and the animation genre is quickly, I think, earning a reputation for leading that charge. Obviously, David may not have the same kind of profound theological impact as the adaptations earlier this year that focused on like the life of Jesus, but from just a purely cinematic and entertainment standpoint, it is arguably the best of the year, and I think perhaps the best since The Prince of Egypt. I think this is a Bible adaptation that kids will actually want to watch, and not just one that they will be forced to watch because their parents want them to have a Christian alternative to mainstream Hollywood. I think it's another impressive example of just how far faith-based storytelling has come, and it just sets a very high bar for the future. But hey, I would love to hear what you guys think. If you enjoyed this movie as much as I did, or if your kids were really digging it like my kids were, don't be shy. Jump into the comment section. Let's have a conversation on it. If you haven't done so too, encourage you guys, subscribe to the channel, become a Collider. Got lots of other movie reviews, got our Faith and Pop Culture podcast, got interviews, just other fun stuff. We'd love to have you guys be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thank you for watching. Stay safe and continue to collide through World for Christ.